Good morning, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. Maya, so I'm here with Paṭhamaagāravasutta to my right and a special guest to my left, Paṭhamaagāravasutta, who is here for a couple of days at Empty Cloud Monastery. And this morning we will be reading from Anguttara Nikaya 521. So I will put the link of the sutta in the comments, and then the Sangha will be sharing some reflections on the subject matter. And hello to John, Jayanta that are checking in, as well as all the different friends that are entering right now. So before we start, we can pay homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason why we're gathered here today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. All right, and I will be reading from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. And so the sutta begins. Monastics. When a monastic is irreverent and undeferential, and his behavior is uncongenial to their fellow monks, it is impossible for them to fulfill the factor of proper conduct. Without fulfilling the factor of proper conduct, it is impossible for them to fulfill the factor of a trainee. Without fulfilling the factor of a trainee, it is impossible for them to fulfill virtuous behavior. Without fulfilling virtuous behavior, it is impossible for them to fulfill right view. Without fulfilling right view, it is impossible for them to fulfill right concentration. But monastics, when a monastic is reverential and deferential and their behavior is congenial to their fellow monks, it is possible for them to fulfill the duty of proper conduct. Having fulfilled the duty of proper conduct, it is possible for them to fulfill the duty of a trainee. Having fulfilled the duty of a trainee, it is possible for them to fulfill virtuous behavior. Having fulfilled virtuous behavior, it is possible for them to fulfill right view. Having fulfilled right view, it is possible for them to fulfill right concentration. Very short sutta, but very much to the point. So if I can invite Bhante Sudaso to share some reflections.
Well, of course, whenever I see any translation of a sutta, I always want to know what the Pali is.
I will get the Pali for you in a second. All right, here we are.
So this first line here, so it's talking about how first off, the basis of our practice is a sense of reverence and deference. So this sense of genuine respect and appreciation for, first off, the Buddha, because without the Buddha, as Ayasoma mentioned, without the Buddha, we wouldn't be here today. We'd be doing something else. And the Buddha is the one who shows us the path, who showed us the way, who explained the Dhamma to us. So gratitude and appreciation and respect for the Dhamma as well. So the Dhamma, which is the teachings and instructions which lead us towards awakening, towards true happiness and peace and understanding. And also appreciation and respect for the Sangha. So the community of people who, although most of us are far from perfect, we're trying to support each other in the path of awakening. And respect particularly for those Sangha members who have made great progress on the path, who have achieved some particular development of character or understanding or conduct, which is really admirable and appreciable. So this is kind of the polar opposite of arrogance or conceit. Instead, we cultivate a sense of respect and appreciation towards Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And then based upon that, then we look at our fellow spiritual companions. So it's very difficult to practice well by ourselves. And especially in the beginning when we don't really understand the Dhamma and we don't really understand the training, then it's really important to have the support of spiritual companions. So having this deep respect and appreciation for our fellow companions, our fellow monastics, and this wish to behave well with them so that then they will behave well with us. This wish to support their practice, and then in turn they also support our practice. So it's a mutual support on the path. And then this makes it easier to really commit ourselves to the training. So it says the Seka Dhamma, which it means that the teachings are instructions for training oneself, for making progress in the training of awakening. And then committing ourselves to the training, we develop virtue and morality. Developing virtue and morality. Now, this one I find really interesting. He's saying that having fulfilled sila, then one can fulfill samadhi, so right view. So normally the Buddha goes through some intermediary steps between sila and right view. So I find it interesting that in the sutta he directly connects the two. And then the next step, so samadhi then leads to samma samadhi, so right view leading to right concentration. What I find interesting here is that the Buddha is emphasizing, first off, sila as a foundation for right view. So through practicing virtue and morality, through practicing good conduct, then we have the opportunity to start to see things as they really are, to understand how our behaviors and our choices directly shape our experience. So it's starting to get an experiential understanding of karma, how karma operates. So I'd actually love to hear what my fellow companions have to say on this line about fulfilling sila as leading to the fulfillment of right view. I find this a very interesting thing. And then right view as the basis for right samadhi. Again, when we know and see things clearly, when we understand our experience clearly, then we also understand the workings of the mind well enough to understand what is an obstacle to concentration and what is a support to concentration. And we also understand that concentration is an important part of the path. So samadhi is not something that can be set aside. It's a central and critical component of Buddhist practice. So it's just a few opening thoughts on this sutta.
Thank you, Bhante. And if I can invite Thanjagaro to share some of his reflections on the verses of the Buddha or on what Bhante just said, or something new altogether.
Sure. When I was listening and reading the sutta, at least the English, I don't know the Pali too well, but what struck me similarly was the causal or conditional sequence connecting many of these factors in particular. And what I've found quite helpful for myself when reading suttas is actually not so much, reading the sutta, but sort of keeping it in mind as I go throughout the day and the weeks and the months to come. And the reason being is that a lot of times, if there's a curiosity, for example, I have a similar curiosity with a lot of these causal sequences. A lot of these things will tend to get fleshed out in the course of the day as I'm going through life. And sometimes it'll become clear, for example, how does, as Bhante was talking about, how exactly does a sila connect with right view? Because by having this in mind, or having any sutta or a passage of the sutta in mind, what we're doing is we're engaging with it. These suttas are not so much kind of like these static texts of like this, this is, one way of looking at these things is like it's an oracle and it's the truth given down by sort of the Lord Buddha, and that's just the way it is. But another way of looking at this is to actually try to actually see how does or ask a question: what is sila, right? What is right view? And what is it actually true, or what actually is going on? What's the connection between these two things? So the way I often like to see these things is an actual kind of personal investigation into what the Buddha is talking about. You know, what is going on? Is it does this really happen the way the Buddha is describing it? And so that's the first thing that comes to mind as the law of these suttas as an invitation to investigate. Because if something's a curiosity that I don't know how everybody else's minds work, but my mind is often like, oh, but is that true? What's going on with that? And so it gets interested in it. One of the questions I actually had for Abante, the title of and it was talking about irreverence. What's the Pali word here is
Agarava. So Garava means respectful or
respectful,
reverent, and Agarava means not respectful.
Got it. I actually didn't quite know what the definition of reverence was, and respectful. I think people kind of intuitively know what that means, but reverence to me is almost like a step up, or maybe step up is not the correct word. One of the dictionary definitions described as kind of a sense of awe around something, and or even they even say like love or kind of cherishing. And I think that's one thing around, let's say spiritual companionship. I think what's what I'm looking for. To the degree that exists, that's going to be incredibly helpful, because one of the kind of underlying things that helps with that is, I would say, doubt or mistrust, or we have a lot of like kind of questions around, is this true? Is this going to work for me? Is it actually going to lead to happiness? That sort of thing. And when we have like a very like kind of more than respect, like a very deep sense of reverence, awe, almost like love or cherishing, we take it more seriously. At least that's been my experience. Like I was thinking back when I was a layperson before I was a monk, reading the suttas. There was one day I was in a kind of communal library, meditation center library, and I was just reading the suttas, and then it sort of hit me, and I was like wow, like this, it's like almost like struck me how amazing it was that there was a being or beings that said these things. Because it's just, to me, again, I've read some other religious texts, and not to sort of to sort of compare or contrast, but it just struck me how so many of the suttas, I wouldn't say all of them, but many of them, like it really struck me like, wow, seems like really original stuff. Like, how could somebody come up with this? Right? Like it just seemed it kind of struck me. And so it like that carried, because there was that kind of awe there, it carried a certain level of like seriousness, or I couldn't just ignore it. And so that was one of the things, the other observation I had.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Venerables, for your sharings. What comes to mind is, actually, that is also one of the beautiful things that one sees in monasteries. Actually, so the monasteries where you were both trained, there is a lot of forms that are based on essentially developing this reverence and deference, essentially with one another, and towards the Dhamma, and of course towards the Buddha, and of course towards the Sangha, so the triple gem. And when my mom was visiting this past summer, she was very much impressed by how Buddhist people were so loving and caring, and in particular people who were actually born in Buddhist countries, but everyone actually within the community, because we all kind of um, yeah. Somewhat by osmosis help each other out in developing these wholesome qualities. But at the same time, also, being Italian, she was not used to certain forms. And so since she was the mother of a monastic, then a lot of people that are born Buddhist would actually bow to her. And she was feeling very uncomfortable because she was not used to people bowing to her, and being extra careful in how they were offering things, both to myself and to her. And so at a certain point, she made this comment, well, this is really not necessary. My mom speaks her mind. She's very to the point. And I actually invited her to reflect actually precisely on the connection between all those incredible wholesome qualities that she was observing in people and how they were dependently arisen. Essentially, it didn't really use this type of wording, but from exactly holding these forms. And that is one of, I think, the actually hindrances that we can have a lot as people who are not born in Buddhist cultures, even as monastics, actually, as soon as we're perhaps outside of the monastery, or maybe just without particularly senior monastic, more senior, or someone, if we're all, say, like the three of us, then the camera is off and they're like, hey, dude, let's go in. Relating to us in this kind of quote unquote down to earth way. And there's nothing wrong with it, but at a certain point becomes a little bit unhelpful in the practice. So the way also why we keep these forms, and it's actually part of right effort, is also to keep these forms, is to create those conditions of beauty that comes both in the mind and in the actions, and that supports us towards fulfilling all of these factors. This is another way to talk about dependent origination. I love actually when the Buddha shows us different ways to approach dependent origination that is not just like a sort of mnemonic, weird, abstruse, like Sankara, Paṭhamaagāravasutta, we can get very too intellectual about things. But as Venerable Jagaro was saying, is the importance of these teachings is to understand how do they actually apply in everyday life. What exactly is the Buddha talking about? And so when we see that we intentionally cultivate certain forms, it naturally creates the conditions of supportive qualities of mind that then are supportive towards everything else, because obviously, like, a happy mind is easily concentrated, as the Buddha says. So it all kind of, it's this chain link, and I think that's part of actually coming to virtuous behavior and connection with right view. It's understanding the importance of all these forms, understanding the importance of cultivating reverence and deference is connected with right view. And something that maybe we might overlook, just kind of out of practicality, out of like so many different things. We're like, okay, well, I clearly can see the benefit of meditation, for example, but do I actually see the benefit of holding up certain forms that maybe are not particularly coming out spontaneously from the mind? And so a lot of actually living in a monastery is following different customs, different behaviors, and always reflecting. Actually, when Ajahn Pasano was here, I remember one of his reflections that really made an impact on my mind was always to ask ourselves, is this beautiful? And I feel like it's actually a lot more profound than what it might sound. Because once again, whenever one sees people interacting with reverence and deference, it really looks beautiful. And whenever it's instead a kind of casual and brusque sort of communication, it's really not that beautiful. And we see that how the beautiful actually supports our practice, and how the non-beautiful becomes a hindrance. So this is what comes to mind. Let's see if our friends are sharing. Well, they're all checking in and saying hello, but you're always welcome to write any questions or comments that you might have. And in the meanwhile, I'll pass it on again to Bhante Sudaso to see if he has anything else to share.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about one of the Pali words here. So the Pali Paṭhamaagāravasutta, which Bhante Bodhi had translated as congenial. So Paṭhamaagāravasutta, bhaga means share, or a portion of something. So Paṭhamaagāravasutta means speaking of sharing, so sharing things. So it's, I mean, congenial in my mind. It's nice. It's nice to talk about being congenial to one's fellow monks, but I think Paṭhamaagāravasutta, it's more talking about how we're sharing what we have with each other. So rather than being stingy or withholding what we have, like even though as monks we usually don't have very much stuff, we always make an effort to share it with each other. So I think that brings out a different angle to that particular one. So it's not just that we're deferential and respectful towards each other, but also we make an effort to share whatever we have with each other. And then this makes it easier then to practice right conduct and so on.
Blending like milk and water.
Yeah, but also it's cultivating this attitude of always paying attention to one's companions and always looking to see, like, what do they need? How can I help? So do I have something that would be of benefit to the others? Or how can I contribute some of my time or some of my attention or some of my effort, or how can I help out in some way with my fellow companions? So I think it's also cultivating those qualities of consideration, of kind attentiveness and compassion and so on, which then are a powerful basis for right conduct, as he's talking here in Sila. But also it's a basis for softening the mind, like helping to weaken some of the defilements of mind, which then make it easier to develop right view and right concentration, as he's talking about later in the sutta. That was one contribution I wanted to make.
Thank you, Bhante. And Sandhya Ramatiko, you had a question or comment?
I was just wondering if Venerable's thoughts on reverence and faith in my own practice. It seems like as I have faith, it becomes self-reinforcing, and it just builds the more reverence I have, the more faith I have, the more faith I have, the more the reverence, kind of that awe, that just beauty of the Dhamma shines forth, which gives me more reverence and more confidence in it. And I just wonder if your thoughts on that are just...
I mean, one thing which comes to mind is that as we practice the Dhamma and we see the truth of it and we feel the value of it, then we have a deeper appreciation for it, a deeper confidence in it. And then naturally that leads to an increased reverence for it. And I think it also goes the other way. So deliberately cultivating a sense of reverence towards Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha then helps to encourage us to take it more seriously. And therefore to investigate it more closely, and also to practice it with a bit more dedication. So I completely agree with you. It's this kind of mutually reinforcing, where all the different parts of our practice can build upon each other. And one of those key components is in fact reverence, as the Buddha is talking about in the sutta.
Yeah. What comes to mind is, like actually really being intentional about what we want to develop. So at least, for example, for me, my relationship with Sadham, with developing faith, has been very proactive because it didn't naturally come into my mind. And so the very beginning, I thought, well, I'm just an unfaithful person. But then actually, I remember when I was reading this sutta where the Buddha talks about the hindrances, and in particular, the hindrance of doubt. He gives us the recommendation essentially to, in order to overcome the hindrance of doubt, is to essentially not focus the mind on, not engage the mind in anything that creates the conditions of doubt to arise in the mind. And I was like, oh, how very interesting. Maybe I shouldn't be like obsessing about the marks of the Buddha, for example, like rather than trying to delve deeply into whether or not this was true or what is the point of it. And, like my kind of approach towards that then was like, I don't know about this Buddhism. This sounds really like absurd and blah, 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 blah. And like kind of going in that direction. And I was like, maybe I should just put this on the shelf and get back to it later, or not get back to it at all. And it was so interesting because it was kind of like an active passive way of going about it. And I remember seeing, the sort of the skeptical doubt being starved out a little bit from my mind. So then it occurred to me, I was like, maybe actually I should also actively cultivate the conditions for faith. So instead of thinking I'm like this or I'm not like this, it's rather, what are the conditions that are helpful for faith to arise? And that's when actually I started softening up to a lot of the different traditional elements that are supports of the practice, which is offering incense, which is bowing, which is chanting, which is all of these different supports that at the very beginning I was like, all right, when is the chanting over? When is, do we really need to offer these things to a statue? This is really bizarre. Or all of these thoughts that were appearing in my mind, where I was very scientific, materialist about things. Is this useful or not? Is this actually a perfect engage of my time, or can I do something better? And then kind of using them as means to an end rather than kind of an end itself, or waiting for them to pass. And that's been helpful for me. And that's kind of like the approach that usually I've been taking in terms of these matters, just seeing what can be supportive to this element. And definitely reverence and deference, definitely, creating all of those conditions. Also, when they're senior monastics, it's also even like extra great because you can be more reverent and deferent. And when Ajahn Pasanno was here, it was really delightful. We were all preparing different trays and making sure that he was comfortable, and also making it as seamless as possible so that he didn't even realize. As I remember once we took a walk with him, and the folks here, the other monastics that were here, they cleaned all his room while he was away, and then he came back and the room was all clean. And it just brings joy to have. Actually, I guess what Bhante was talking about is the congenial part. So, we were all congenial. Like, okay, how can we create these supporting? I mean, just talking about it right now creates that really wholesome mind state that then is supportive for everything else. I don't know if Paṭhamaagāravasutta has any other reflections, maybe.
I do. Part of it, when I was, I don't know if there's any questions, but I was kind of, one of my thoughts on this is that, I'm going to share something, and I don't know to whatever extent this is helpful. I realize this has, perhaps a lot to do more with my own personal experience, but in case this is helpful to anybody out there or anybody in the room. I spent a lot of time when I was interested in monasticism, eventually became a monk myself. I was often very amazed by watching the sort of reverence or respect or sort of, that, I'd see many other people around me, both lay people and monks. And one of the things you do as a monk is you just kind of follow suit. You sort of, this is what everybody does. So you do it, you bow this, you put the things on the altar, you clean this, and you just okay, let's just do this and see what happens. And I actually, I remember going into sometimes you go into people's huts and you see this incredible like altar, of like 10 different Buddha statues and like pictures of their parents and like incense and candles and everything, it looks like this kind of, incredible like artwork fortress, and, and they have like, some people have like chimes and bells and, they really get into it. They really like this stuff. And, so I try to do, okay, I guess I have to go back to my kuti and, try to do something. And, I put some pictures up of, I guess people, I guess I respect these people. It is not that I don't, it's just, that kind of, what I found is that, there's, I guess, for a lot of people, I guess there's a popular saying, sort of fake it till you make it. And I guess that's what I was trying to do. And it didn't actually do anything. And I'm not saying this to discourage people from trying. I think you should try this, right? Because a lot of people do this and they do find a connection, right? But I didn't. And this has actually been a kind of a query for me, like kind of what's going on for quite a long time. And my sort of understanding my mind better now, what I actually think is going on is that there's other things that are going that are blocking the emotion from arising. And so there can be just the case that it's like, oh yeah, it's just not this, the emotions of like awe and respect, just not very well developed. You just have to kind of try out different things and don't dwell on this, and they'll start to develop. But sometimes for some people, and I can speak for myself, there actually can be something going on that's actually blocking the emotion from rising. It's actually, in my own case, it's almost like a self-protection mechanism. It's worth pointing out that sort of sense of self in there. There's a sense that if I were to be reverential, if I were to be deferential, I get hurt. And so I think it's worth mentioning if that's what I'm saying you think it might kind of ring true to you. Maybe you tried some of these things, they don't really interest you. Then the sort of path is not necessarily to just sort of try to mimic what other people are doing. It's actually to find out what's going on with that protection. What's the hurt about? So it's a different sort of path. You're not sort of directly trying to, generate reverence. So these are always good things to do, because, if you're with somebody, it's always good to pay attention to the people's positive qualities, things that there is good. But in terms of if you're finding something, it's like kind of persistently not coming up, maybe it's because it's getting blocked by something. So I'm just putting that out there.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It's very important. And we do have some comments. Well, first of all, welcome to all the different friends that have been checking in. And Dan says about what I had said about put it on the shelf and get back to it later. People do that with rebirth. They get back to it later. Hopefully.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah, hopefully that one will just throw it out of the shelf. And Manny says, how can we improve our respect to others?
Well, one thing which actually really helps is to actively look for respectable qualities in other people. So, especially speaking as a hate type, I'm used to doing the opposite. I'm used to looking at someone and being like, okay, they're sloppy, they eat loudly, they walk loudly, they don't pay attention when they put things down, like, and so I'm always like finding things to be like disrespectful about. But then it's like, well, actually, why don't I actively search for the respectable qualities in someone? It's like, oh wait, actually, this person is really friendly. They're really kind to other people. They wear their robe very neatly. Like you can start, when you actually look for respectable qualities, you'll start to see them. So then when you look at someone, instead of like immediately start rattling off the list of everything you hate about them, and it's a popular movie when I was a kid, 10 Things I Hate About You. So my mind tends to go in that mode. Like I see someone and I'm like, okay, there's 10 things I hate about you and 10 things I hate about you. Not you, you're great. 10 things. But instead start thinking like, oh, there's 10 things I respect about you. There's 10 things I respect about you. There's 10 things I respect about you. And you'll notice that then the mind naturally starts to have more respect because that's what we're directing the mind towards. So that's one thing that comes to mind to help with that.
Yeah, thank you, Bronten. That was hilarious, but very, very true and helpful. Yeah, another thing is also maybe if our mind goes directly into, looking at everything that we hate, is also to actively look for impressive people. So that we really want to, as much as possible, surround ourselves with, well, rather than surround ourselves, at least see some impressive people or people who are much better than us every now and then. So then that it's just natural. It's easier. It's an easier practice. And so then based on that awe, based on that natural reverence that comes in seeing these beautiful, wholesome qualities of mine, then we can have a bit of an easier time doing it with more difficult people, so to speak. It's no different than actually when we start cultivating metta practice. We don't want to start by generating metta towards the enemy. That's quite advanced. But rather we want to do it with, ascension being where it comes very easy, very natural, where there's like little sort of conflict. So I feel like if reverence and deference doesn't come naturally in the mind, we want to take up some baby steps and make it a little bit easier for us. So that's what I would say. I don't know if Venerable, you have any other things you had shared a little bit already earlier.
Just to figure out both your comments. I mean, I haven't actually met anybody that there's one sutta where the Buddha is describing kind of what to do with different kind of character types, and it's like they have some wholesome qualities. There's one that's like if there's no wholesome qualities, he gives them what to do. But I actually haven't met anybody like that where I've seen no wholesome or positive qualities. I just haven't. So fortunately, it's you can almost always. It doesn't. I mean, again, I'm not saying that these people don't exist. It's just to say that I think, especially if you're around meditation or Buddhist circles, it's probably pretty. Except I can't imagine maybe you guys, but usually you can find something in somebody. Go, okay, yeah, and pay attention to that. It's not, and it's not to sort of if there is like something kind of reoccurring, maybe you've had difficult interactions with this person or whatever. It's not to sort of ignore that. It's just to again, if you tend towards negativity or hatred or aversion, it's to sort of balance out that tendency because it's always falling onto one side. It's kind of like you have like a, I don't know, like some push cart. It's always like at the supermarket. Those things, and often they veer to one side or the other, right? So if it's always veering off to the right, you have to give it some, effort to the left, and that's where it'll go straight.
Sadhu. Yes, thank you, Bhante. And Rick says, how does reverence relate to self-transcendence?
Well, I mean, by cultivating a sense of respect towards something outside of yourself, then that naturally tends to reduce one's self-centeredness. So to me, that the connection is quite clear there.
Great, thank you. Kita says, Bhante Sudasula is very funny about the hate types. All the hate types are like, ha ha ha, yes, I identify with that. And Sun says, why do some people naturally command respect while others seem to face disrespect? Is there a karmic cause, like if one is not angry, one is more beautiful, etc.? Is there something like that for respect?
Well, I mean, yeah. So, of course, sometimes it's things that we're doing. So if we're acting in a way which is not particularly respectable, then of course others won't respect us as much. But also there can be past karmic causes for these things. So, and the simplest one is if one is disrespectful towards others, then in future lives, then you can expect to be the recipient of disrespect as well. So sometimes there is a past karmic cause for these things, but often it's also just what we're doing in this life. Like, are we behaving in a way which is respectable or not?
Great. And Rick says, according to Wikipedia, reverence is a feeling or attitude of deep respect tinged with awe, veneration. I feel this way towards the Buddha's path of liberation, towards nature, and towards the positive ripple effects that are the result of acts of generosity, loving kindness, and compassion offered out in the world. Oh, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Would you like to comment on this?
Sadhu, well said.
Great, excellent. And that's the last comment here. Do we have any last remarks or anyone that wants to ask any questions or share any other comments?
Okay, maybe that's enough for today.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning for Sutta study. If you have any lingering questions, you can bring them this evening to Monk Chat, where it will be the panel of these three monastics. And then we'll try our best to answer all your questions related to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And if you are around New Jersey, this weekend on Sunday, we will be celebrating Katinam ceremony here at Empty Cloud, so you can come in the morning and stay the whole day, and will be lovely to see you. All right, so we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu.